Imagine building a life with someone you believe to be your perfect match. Sarah and John, a seemingly ideal couple, share dreams, laughter, and a deep bond that many envied. Their love story was the epitome of romance, until a single revelation tore their world apart. What if the person you thought you knew inside and out wasn't who you thought they were? What if everything you believed about your marriage was based on a secret so shocking it would unravel your life and lead to a tragic end? This is the story of Sarah and John, a couple whose marriage appeared flawless to the outside world. Their journey together was filled with love, hope, and shared aspirations. But beneath the surface, John harbored a secret about his past, a secret that, when uncovered, would shatter Sarah's perception of their relationship and lead to an unimaginable tragedy. If you think you know where this story is heading, think again. The shocking twists and devastating outcome will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, love, and the consequences of hidden secrets. Don't miss what's coming next. Like this video, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the full truth behind this tragic tale. It was a warm evening in early June 2019 when Sarah Thompson, a 28-year-old graphic designer, attended an art exhibition at a friend's gallery. A lifelong lover of art, Sarah was captivated by the creativity of the displays. The gallery was filled with laughter, lively discussions, and the hum of soft jazz in the background. As she made her way through the crowd, one particular piece of abstract art caught her eye. That's when she noticed him. John Davis, a 30-year-old marketing executive with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. He was standing near her favorite piece, his fingers lightly brushing the edge of the frame, studying it with a thoughtful expression. Sarah, ever the curious one, couldn't resist commenting on the piece. "It's fascinating how the artist used so many layers to create depth," she said. John turned to her with a smile that immediately felt inviting, as if they had known each other for years, not just moments. His eyes locked with hers, and in an instant they began talking about the art, their tastes, and their personal connections to creativity. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, from abstract art to their shared love for travel. They talked about their favorite destinations, places they dreamt of visiting, experiences they hoped to have. Sarah felt an undeniable spark. It wasn't just about the art, it was something deeper, something unspoken. Their connection felt like something rare, a thread weaving through the crowd of strangers, pulling them closer. As the night went on, they shared stories about their lives. John revealed he had a passion for photography, though he didn't get to pursue it as much as he would have liked due to his demanding career. Sarah, on the other hand, explained her love for design and how she had always dreamt of starting her own art studio one day. There was a certain ease in their interactions, a comfort that made it feel like they were two old friends reunited after years apart. It wasn't long before they exchanged numbers, and Sarah found herself eagerly anticipating their next conversation. As the weeks passed, their connection only deepened. They spent weekends together exploring the city, attending exhibitions, and simply enjoying each other's company. John took Sarah to his favorite hidden coffee spots, while she introduced him to the quiet charm of local art studios. They discovered mutual friends, attended the same events, and quickly became a fixture in each other's lives. What started as a casual meeting at an art exhibition blossomed into something much more meaningful. Their relationship was everything Sarah had hoped for. John was attentive, thoughtful, and charming in every way. He always seemed to know the right thing to say, whether it was to make her laugh after a long day or to offer a comforting word when she was feeling down. John was a man of action, someone who didn't just talk about dreams, but actively worked toward them. They made plans together for the future, building a life that seemed as perfect as their romance. Just shy of a year into their relationship, John took Sarah on a surprise trip to Paris. Sarah was speechless when he proposed at the top of the Eiffel Tower, surrounded by the twinkling lights of the city. The excitement in her heart was overwhelming as she accepted. It felt like a dream. This was it. They were going to build a life together, forever. Their wedding, just 6 months later, was everything they had imagined and more. The ceremony was held in a vineyard, with rows of lush grapes framing the setting sun. Sarah wore a lace gown and John, as always, looked every bit the handsome man she had fallen in love with. Surrounded by their closest friends and family, they exchanged vows, promising to cherish one another through all of life's ups and downs. Their first dance, a slow, heartfelt song, was a symbol of the bond they had formed, a promise of forever. The months that followed were filled with joy and anticipation. They talked about children, how they both wanted a big family someday. They planned their future together, imagining the home they would create, the adventures they would have. There was a sense of certainty in the air. Their love was solid, unshakable. Or so Sarah believed. However, as the years passed, things began to change. It wasn't immediate, but there were subtle shifts. At first, Sarah attributed them to the natural ebb and flow of life. Work had become more demanding for both of them, and they were adjusting to the stresses of married life. Yet, slowly, the cracks began to form. John, once so open and expressive, became more withdrawn. His usual charm seemed distant, as though he was holding something back. At first, Sarah chalked it up to stress, work, deadlines, the constant juggle between personal and professional life. But then, there were the little moments. The long silences during dinner. The way he'd look at his phone more often than engage in their conversations. Sometimes, she'd find him staring out the window, lost in thought, as if somewhere far away. It wasn't like him. Their intimate moments, once passionate and frequent, became few and far between. Sarah found herself wondering why things had changed, but she never dared to ask. What could be wrong? Their relationship was built on trust and love. Surely it was just a rough patch, right? As Sarah continued to notice these subtle changes, her gut told her that something was off. John's moods seemed unpredictable. One day he would be warm and affectionate, and the next he would be distant, his attention consumed by something she couldn't quite grasp. When they tried to talk about their future, the conversation would often fizzle out, as if John wasn't entirely present. But still, Sarah brushed aside her suspicions. She convinced herself it was just life. He was busy, and so was she. Maybe their connection had just settled into a comfortable routine. Maybe it was normal for things to slow down. And yet, despite her attempts to calm herself, a sense of unease began to linger. It was hard to ignore. There was something there, something that felt different. But Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on it. Was this just the natural course of any marriage, or was there something deeper, something unspoken, that John wasn't ready to share? Little did Sarah know, the answers she sought were closer than she could ever imagine, and they would soon turn her world upside down. In those quiet moments when Sarah lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, the thoughts of what could be wrong with her marriage haunted her. She loved John more than anything, and yet something felt like it was slipping away. What was it? What had changed? The answers, when they came, would shatter everything she thought she knew about her husband and herself. And it was just the beginning of a journey into a truth far darker than she could ever have expected. Sarah Thompson had always believed that love was a bond so strong that nothing could tear it apart. She'd known that with John. From the very first time they met, Sarah had been drawn to his strength, his confidence, and the way he made her feel like the most important person in the room. Their relationship had been easy, effortless. She never questioned it. But as time passed, the cracks began to show, and Sarah found herself grappling with an emotional weight she had never expected. It started subtly. At first, Sarah brushed off her concerns. After all, every couple goes through ups and downs, right? But as the months turned into years, her doubts began to surface. She could feel the shift. They had always talked about starting a family, but despite their best efforts, they were struggling to conceive. Every month that passed without a positive test felt like another layer of frustration added to her heart. Sarah had always been a planner, a dreamer, and the thought of becoming a mother was one of the most cherished dreams of her life. But as time went on, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Was it her fault? Was something wrong with her body? Maybe it was her stress. Work had been overwhelming lately, and John had been working longer hours. She couldn't help but wonder if it was the pressure, the endless tests, the anxiety that had somehow created a barrier between them. Sarah found herself constantly questioning, doubting herself. She had tried to stay optimistic, but each failed attempt made her question her worth, her ability to give John the one thing he wanted, a child to call their own. The longing for a baby was slowly turning into an obsession. Was there something she wasn't seeing? Was it her fault that they couldn't have a child? She knew John was frustrated too, but he would never voice it. He was always so calm, so collected, never showing vulnerability. She loved him more than anything, but the pressure of this unspoken tension between them was starting to eat away at her. "I'm not enough," Sarah thought to herself in the quiet hours of the night, after another failed attempt to conceive. "Why can't we have what we want? Why can't we have this simple thing?" She could feel a distance growing between them, but she didn't know what to do about it. She tried to focus on their love, on the foundation they had built together, but the more she thought about the problem, the more confused she became. She was afraid to ask John directly, afraid to make it real, afraid of what he might say. It wasn't just the fertility struggles that were wearing her down. It was the isolation she felt from him. But even through all of this, Sarah couldn't help but love him with everything she had. He was her rock, the man who had shown her how to love more fully than she ever thought possible. She remembered their early days, their carefree days, filled with laughter and adventure. John had always been the one who led their relationship, with unwavering certainty. That strong, confident presence of his had made her feel safe and secure. He was the kind of man who dominated every room he entered, the kind of man who knew how to take care of everything, how to fix things, how to make her feel protected, loved, and cared for. But something had shifted, something she couldn't explain. His presence, once so full of energy, now felt distant, as if he was holding something back. Sarah sensed the barrier, the unspoken distance that had crept into their relationship. She couldn't quite figure it out, but she could feel it every time they were together. It wasn't his love for her, that much was clear. But something else, something deeper, was changing. She would watch him sometimes, lost in his thoughts, a distant look in his eyes, and she would wonder what was going on in his mind. The man who once confided in her about everything seemed to retreat behind a veil of silence, locked away in a world of his own. At night, when they lay in bed together, she would feel the coldness between them. It wasn't the absence of love, it was the absence of connection, a missing link she couldn't place. She tried to reach him, to ask him about the distance, but every time she did, his answers were vague, as though he was keeping something from her. "I'm just tired, Sarah," he would say, brushing off her concerns. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. She had loved him completely, trusted him with her heart, but now she felt like she was standing at a distance, waiting for him to open up, to share whatever was eating away at him. John was everything Sarah had ever wanted in a partner. He was strong, confident, and carried an aura of calm that made her feel safe. When she looked at him, she saw someone who could handle anything that life threw their way. He had a way of dominating every room he walked into, but not in an overpowering, aggressive way. Instead, it was as if the world naturally bent to his presence. His confidence was magnetic, and Sarah found herself falling deeper for him with each passing day. He was the protector, the one who made decisions and handled things. In many ways, he was her perfect match. When life felt overwhelming, John always knew what to do. He was the kind of person who could fix any problem, whether it was a flat tire or an emotional crisis. He had this effortless ability to make everything feel manageable. Sarah admired him for it, trusted him completely. But despite all of this, something was beginning to feel off. Sarah couldn't pinpoint it, but the man who had once been her anchor seemed more distant, less in touch with the world around him. He had always been a quiet man, not overly emotional, but now there was a coldness that she couldn't ignore. His once warm smile now seemed strained. The way he spoke to her, the way he interacted with the world, was different. There was something that just wasn't adding up. For all his strength and leadership, John had always been open with Sarah. Until now. There was a wall between them, one that Sarah couldn't break down no matter how hard she tried. The man who had once made her feel like she could take on the world with him was suddenly an enigma, out of reach, no matter how hard she tried to connect with him. Despite all the tension, Sarah's attachment to John grew deeper. She loved him. There was no question about that. He was the man she had dreamed of sharing her life with, the man she had married with the expectation of building a future together. But as their struggle to conceive continued, as their connection began to fray at the edges, Sarah couldn't help but feel that the perfect image she had once had of their relationship was slipping away. She found herself constantly analyzing their conversations, looking for clues, trying to understand the underlying tension. Was it her? Was it him? Was it something they couldn't fix? The emotional toll of it all was beginning to weigh heavily on her. The yearning for a child, combined with the growing distance between them, was slowly breaking her down. She loved him with all her heart, but the doubt creeping into her mind was impossible to ignore. Would they make it through this? Could their bond survive the strain of their infertility struggles? Sarah didn't know, but the fear of losing him was always there, gnawing at the back of her mind. She loved John more than anything, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something that could destroy them both if left unchecked. What do you think is going on between Sarah and John? How would you deal with the tension building in their relationship? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next shocking twist in this heartbreaking tale. Stay tuned, because what happens next will change everything. As the years passed, the dream of starting a family became more and more elusive for Sarah. It had been months, then years, of trying, hoping, and failing. Each month, she would eagerly wait for that positive result, only to face disappointment when her period arrived. At first, she told herself it was nothing to worry about. After all, it wasn't unusual for couples to take time to conceive. But after a year, then another, Sarah couldn't ignore the growing sense of frustration that weighed heavily on her. There was a sinking feeling in her gut that she couldn't shake. It wasn't just the failed test that bothered her. It was the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, the problem lay with her. Was she broken? Was something wrong with her body? These questions echoed in her mind, louder each time she thought about them. Her own doubts began to chip away at her self-esteem. She loved John more than anything, and the idea that she might not be able to give him the one thing he wanted most, a child, was slowly consuming her. She began to wonder if her inability to conceive was some sort of cosmic punishment. Why can't I get pregnant? Sarah thought repeatedly. What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and wonder why this was happening to her. Her mind raced through every possible reason, every possible explanation, but there was no answer. Every time, they made love with the hope that this time it would work, and it didn't. She felt her heart break just a little more. The hope was fading. The optimistic woman she once was beginning to turn into someone else. Someone filled with doubt and frustration. She couldn't bear the thought of talking about it all the time, of burdening John with her fears, but it was becoming harder to hold it in. She feared that he was starting to pull away from her too, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend everything was okay. The tension between Sarah and John had been subtle at first. They had always been a team, working together to achieve their dreams. But now, the sense of unity between them felt strained. The weight of the infertility issue was not only affecting Sarah, but also slowly creeping into their relationship. John, who had once been the rock in their marriage, had become withdrawn. He was always supportive on the surface, but his emotional distance was palpable. As Sarah's frustration grew, she found herself becoming more and more isolated. The distance between them grew, not just physically, but emotionally. They would spend evenings in the same room, but their conversations were stilted, lacking the warmth and connection they once shared. Sarah, desperate for answers, wanted to talk about what was happening, wanted to share her fears, but she didn't know how to bring it up without making John feel like it was all her fault. She wondered if he was secretly frustrated too, or worse, maybe even resentful. After all, he was just as invested in having a family as she was, and yet it was her body that wasn't cooperating. Sarah's mind spiraled with thoughts of inadequacy, feeling as though she was failing not only as a woman, but also as a wife. The couple had tried various fertility treatments, doctor's appointments, fertility tests, and expensive procedures that seemed to lead to nothing. Every appointment brought a new round of disappointment. Sarah felt like a failure every time they left the clinic, hearing the same words, "We need to try again." The emotional toll was wearing them both down, but especially Sarah. John, as supportive as he was, couldn't seem to connect with the growing emotional fatigue that Sarah was feeling. He couldn't fully understand the weight of the situation, the constant fear that it might never happen, and the growing sense of isolation she experienced, even with him right by her side. There was no one she could talk to about it. Their friends didn't have these problems, and she felt embarrassed and ashamed that her body wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. She wasn't sure how to keep pretending everything was okay, how to keep acting like the loving wife who could handle it all. Finally, after 2 years of trying and hoping, Sarah and John made the decision to seek professional help. The emotional burden had grown too heavy for Sarah to carry on her own. It wasn't just about the frustration anymore. It was the fear of facing the truth that there might be something seriously wrong. Her pride and dignity had taken a back seat to the overwhelming need for answers. But even with the decision made, Sarah felt vulnerable, embarrassed, and unsure of what to expect. She couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy that lingered, even as they walked into the doctor's office. Sarah had always been a strong, independent woman, but now, with every passing day, she felt weaker and more defeated. She hated the thought of being seen as weak or broken, and the idea of someone else looking at her, examining her body, only intensified those feelings. The waiting room was quiet, sterile, and cold. Sarah fidgeted in her seat, trying to ignore the pit of anxiety growing in her stomach. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her, and the sense of dread deepened. John, ever the calm and collected one, sat next to her, his hand resting on hers. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Even his touch, which used to bring comfort, now felt distant, like he was just going through the motions. "Everything's going to be fine," he whispered, but Sarah wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure her or himself. They both knew how much was riding on this visit, but neither of them could fully face the possibility of the answers that might come. The unknown was terrifying, but the fear of not knowing was even worse. As they were called into the doctor's office, the tension between them grew. Sarah's hands were clammy, and her heart raced as they sat in front of the doctor, who was poised with the results of their most recent tests. The doctor's calm demeanor did little to ease the weight of the moment. The seconds ticked by, and Sarah felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. What if they were told there was nothing physically wrong? What if it was something they hadn't yet considered? Her thoughts were a blur as the doctor began to speak, but Sarah could barely focus on the words. All she could hear was the beating of her own heart, louder than anything the doctor could say. What was coming next? Would they finally have the answers they so desperately needed? Or was this just another dead end? Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the truth, but she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. This was the moment they had to face reality, and no matter how painful that might be, they couldn't run from it any longer. If you've been through something similar, or if you think Sarah is about to face a devastating truth, let us know what you think in the comments below. Can they make it through this? What would you do if you were in her shoes? Hit the like button, subscribe to stay updated, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this heartbreaking journey. You won't believe what happens next. The moment the doctor's words left his mouth, Sarah felt the room tilt beneath her feet. She hadn't expected this. She couldn't have prepared herself for what she was about to hear. "Your husband, he's transgender," the doctor said softly, as if he were offering condolences instead of delivering a bombshell. "He transitioned years ago, before you met." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, suffocating her in a way that she couldn't explain. Sarah stared at the doctor, her mind racing to catch up with what she had just heard. She blinked rapidly, trying to understand, trying to make sense of the sentence that seemed to cut through the silence of the room like a sharp knife. The world around her suddenly felt like it was spinning. The walls, the sterile doctor's office, the bright overhead lights, they all blurred together as her mind struggled to comprehend what had just been said. John, the man she had married, the man she had built a life with, wasn't who she thought he was. He had kept a part of his past hidden from her, something so significant, something so fundamental to his identity, that it had gone unnoticed for years. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but found herself unable to form any words. How could she not have known? How had John kept this secret from her for so long? The betrayal wasn't just in the revelation itself. It was the weight of the years they had spent together. Years where she had trusted him with everything, only to find that he had kept the truth buried deep inside. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over her. Her hands trembled, her stomach churned, and the room seemed to close in around her. John, her husband, wasn't the man she thought he was. Was this some cruel joke? No, it couldn't be. The doctor's face was serious, his expression one of concern, and Sarah could see the sincerity in his eyes. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the truth. Her mind raced to process it all. She thought back to everything she knew about John, the strong, confident man she had fallen in love with. The man who had been her protector, her partner, and her confidant. The man who had given her a sense of security and love that she had never known before. How could he have hidden something like this from her? Why hadn't he told her? What else had he kept from her? The truth hit Sarah like a ton of bricks, and her entire world began to crumble. She had always prided herself on knowing John better than anyone else. She believed in their connection, their bond, and the depth of their love. But now, it felt like everything she had known was a lie. How could she have been so blind? How could she have missed something so monumental about the man she loved? Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to lash out. How had John been able to look her in the eyes all these years, knowing the truth, and never once told her? The feeling of betrayal was suffocating, leaving her unable to breathe, unable to think straight. The life they had created now felt like a fragile house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. She thought about their wedding day, the vows they had made to each other. She had promised to love him for better or worse, in sickness and in health. But now, she was faced with a truth she wasn't prepared for, a truth that would forever change the foundation of their marriage. The anger bubbled up inside of her, mingling with the confusion and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. She felt like she had been lied to for years. The woman who had been so certain about her relationship, about the man she had chosen to marry, now felt lost and hollow. Nothing about this situation made sense. She couldn't wrap her mind around how John could have kept this from her, how he could have lived this lie in front of her every single day. The love she thought she knew so intimately now felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Every memory, every moment they had shared, felt tainted by the fact that John had hidden this part of himself from her. And yet, she knew, deep down, that she still loved him. The love didn't just disappear. But how could she reconcile the love she felt with the pain and the betrayal that now consumed her? Her heart ached for the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had shared so much of his life with her, and yet kept this one monumental truth hidden away. Sarah felt herself breaking, slowly, piece by piece, as she grappled with the emotional fallout of this revelation. How would you feel if you found out the person you loved most had been keeping such a significant part of their life hidden from you? Do you think Sarah can overcome this revelation, or is it too much for their marriage to survive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on the rest of this shocking story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The truth is only just beginning to unravel. Sarah sat in the quiet of their living room, her mind racing, her body numb. She couldn't escape the words that the doctor had spoken. Your husband is transgender. He transitioned years ago, before you met. Those words, those simple words, had shattered her reality. The life she had built, the love she had cherished, now seemed like a fragile illusion. Every moment she had spent with John, every intimate conversation, every laugh they shared, it all felt tainted. She had trusted him, believed in him with all her heart. But now, as she sat in their shared space, Sarah felt a deep, overwhelming sense of betrayal that left her breathless. How could John have hidden this from her? How could he keep such an essential part of himself a secret for so long? The pain of it was suffocating. It was like a slow, steady ache that gnawed at her chest, twisting and turning, never giving her a moment of peace. She had thought they were a team, partners, in every sense of the word. But now she was questioning everything. Was their entire marriage a lie? Were all their dreams and promises built on false pretenses? Could she ever truly trust him again? Sarah's mind raced with thoughts she could barely contain. She had loved John with everything she had. He was the man who made her feel safe, secure, and adored. But now all of that seemed like a carefully constructed facade, a version of John that didn't include this essential truth about who he really was. Her emotions fluctuated wildly: confusion, anger, heartbreak, and a sense of deep loss. She had always seen herself as open-minded, accepting of others, yet here she was, feeling like she couldn't process this new reality. How could she move forward knowing that the person she had trusted most had kept something so monumental hidden from her? The betrayal felt like it had stripped away the foundation of their relationship, leaving Sarah with a deep, aching emptiness. Sarah had always thought that love could overcome anything, that truth, no matter how difficult, would be the glue that held them together. But now she wondered if she could ever look at John the same way again. Could she still love him the way she once did? Or had this revelation changed everything forever? John sat on the edge of their bed, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the floor. He could hear Sarah's breath in the room, heavy with the weight of a silence that stretched between them. He had never imagined that telling her would be like this, that the woman he had spent so many years loving would look at him with disbelief, anger, and betrayal. He could feel the chasm growing between them, widening with each passing second. He had kept this secret for so long, terrified that if Sarah ever found out, she would leave him. His past, the life he had lived before transitioning, had been a source of shame for him. Even though he had made peace with his identity years ago, sharing it with Sarah had always felt like a risk too great to take. He feared rejection, and more than that, he feared losing her. "Sarah, I never wanted to hurt you," John whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes were lowered, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't think you would love me if you knew the truth. I thought if I kept it hidden, we could just live the life we dreamed of without anything standing in the way." His voice cracked as he spoke, the weight of his words pressing on him like a physical burden. "I never meant for it to be a lie," John continued, his hands trembling in his lap. "I thought it was best to just keep the past in the past. I didn't want you to see me as anything other than the man you loved." John's heart ached as he looked at Sarah, whose face was a mixture of confusion and anger. He could see the pain in her eyes, the hurt that he had caused by keeping the truth hidden. His secret had been the silent weight between them, and now it was all laid bare. He had never imagined it would come to this, never thought that the truth would break the trust they had built. As the reality of the situation set in, the emotional distance between Sarah and John began to grow. It wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. Sarah found herself retreating emotionally, unable to connect with the man who had once felt like her everything. The man who had been her protector, her confidant, the one she trusted more than anyone else, was now a stranger in so many ways. The warmth that had once existed between them now felt like a distant memory. The quiet moments they had once shared, where their connection felt deep and unbreakable, now seemed awkward and painful. Every time Sarah looked at John, she was reminded of the lie he had lived, of the secret he had kept buried for so long. Sarah's internal conflict grew as she processed the truth. Could she continue to live with John, the man she thought she knew so well, after everything had been laid bare? Could she look past the betrayal, the feeling that her entire life with him had been built on a foundation of half-truths? There were moments when Sarah would catch herself, wondering if it would be easier to walk away, to escape the overwhelming confusion and pain. But then, there was a part of her that still loved him. The man she had married, the man who had shared his life with her. Was he still the same person, despite the secret he had kept? Could their relationship survive this new reality? Was it possible to rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Sarah didn't have the answers yet. She was still reeling from the shock of the revelation, still trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions that had taken over her. The road ahead seemed uncertain, and she couldn't help but wonder if their love, their marriage, was strong enough to weather the storm. The cracks were there, and they were only growing wider with each passing day. As the days passed, the emotional distance between Sarah and John only grew. The heavy silence that had once been a rare occurrence in their relationship now became an ever-present companion. Their conversations had become hollow, forced, and mechanical. The love and warmth that had once flowed so easily between them were now replaced with confusion, hurt, and an underlying sense of betrayal. Sarah could no longer look at John the same way. The man she loved, the man she had built her life around, was no longer the same. How could he be? The man she had married had kept a secret so deep, so significant, that it shattered everything she believed about their marriage. How could she go back to the way things were when every time she looked at him, she was reminded of the betrayal? Each time Sarah tried to reach out to John, to find some shred of the connection they had once shared, she was met with a wall. He seemed distant, closed off, and Sarah couldn't figure out why. Was he regretting everything? Did he resent her for not being able to accept him for who he was? Or was it simply that their love had become too fractured to repair? The weight of the situation began to take its toll on Sarah's emotional state. The pain of betrayal, the uncertainty of their future, and the constant conflict within her left her drained, both mentally and physically. She had never imagined she would be here, questioning everything she had ever known about love, trust, and the man she thought she had spent her life with. One evening, after weeks of tension and unresolved emotions, the situation came to a head. They were sitting in their living room, the quiet unbearable, when Sarah could no longer hold it in. The feelings of betrayal, confusion, and anger had built up to an unmanageable point, and she finally erupted. "How could you do this to me, John?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "How could you keep something like that from me for so long? All these years, I've trusted you, I've loved you, and this whole time you've been hiding a huge part of yourself from me. Why? Why didn't you tell me?" John sat there, his eyes downcast, unable to look at her. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I didn't think you'd love me if you knew the truth. I didn't think you'd want me if you knew I wasn't the person you thought I was." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, her chest tight with grief and fury. "You think that's an excuse?" she shouted, standing up abruptly. "You think hiding the truth from me was better than just being honest? You didn't trust me enough to let me love you for who you really are." The anger surged through her, a flood of emotions that had been building for far too long. She felt betrayed, deceived, and hurt in ways she couldn't put into words. The overwhelming sense of confusion and betrayal clouded her judgment, and in that moment, all she wanted was to make the pain stop. She needed him to feel what she was feeling. She needed him to understand the depth of the hurt he had caused. In the heat of the argument, Sarah's mind went blank. Her emotions were a storm, anger, hurt, and disbelief all boiling over. Every word, every accusation, every tear she had held back for so long now spilled out in a tidal wave. Her heart raced, her breath shallow, and she could feel her hands trembling with the intensity of her feelings. As the fight escalated, Sarah's hands reached for the nearest object in her path, a heavy glass vase sitting on the coffee table. Without thinking, her hand closed around it, and in a moment of sheer emotional desperation, she swung it at John. The sound of glass shattering filled the room, followed by a sickening silence. John collapsed to the floor, blood seeping from his head as Sarah stood frozen, the weight of what she had just done sinking in. The room felt as though it was spinning. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling, but she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. How had things gotten so far? How had they gone from love to this? In that instant, Sarah's world shattered. The anger, the betrayal, the confusion, they all collided in one irreversible moment. Her body trembled as she knelt beside him, the reality of what she had done setting in. But it was too late. The damage had been done. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. The aftermath was swift. Within moments, Sarah had called 911, but there was nothing they could do. John was gone. The police arrived, their presence cold and official, as they processed the scene. Sarah was in a daze, her hands trembling as they took her into custody. She was placed under arrest, her world now a blur of flashing lights, officers, and questions. The media quickly caught wind of the story. Headlines screamed about the shocking tragedy, a marriage that had once seemed perfect, now torn apart by lies and a moment of violence. As the investigation unfolded, the revelation that John had been transgender became the focal point of the case. The public was shocked, not just by the murder, but by the hidden truth that had come to light only after Sarah's outburst. The police began their investigation, piecing together the events leading up to that fateful night. Sarah's emotional state was examined, her feelings of betrayal and hurt laid bare for the world to see. But no matter the reason, the outcome remained the same. A man was dead, and a woman was now facing the consequences of an irreversible action. The story captured the public's attention, with discussions swirling about the complexity of gender identity, the pressures of keeping secrets, and the tragic culmination of a relationship torn apart by emotional turmoil. The once perfect love story had ended in tragedy, leaving everyone to ask the same question: how could it all have gone so horribly wrong? The events that led to Sarah's tragic actions have left a wake of devastation, not only for the couple involved, but for both families and the broader community. What could have been a beautiful marriage, filled with love and understanding, turned tragic in the blink of an eye. The unraveling of their lives, marked by the secrets John had kept, has forever changed both Sarah and John's families. The loss is immeasurable, and the pain is something that will likely echo through both families for years to come. In many ways, this tragedy highlights the complexities of human relationships, especially when it comes to secrets and identity. John's decision to hide his past, his transition, was not one made lightly, but it was one that ultimately set the stage for the heartbreaking events that followed. Sarah, in her own way, was also a victim of this secrecy. The love they shared, the years they spent together, were all built on a foundation of half-truths. Trust, once broken, is often impossible to fully rebuild. And in the case of Sarah and John, the cracks in their relationship eventually led to irreparable harm. This case also shines a light on the challenges faced by transgender individuals in relationships. For John, the fear of rejection, the shame surrounding his past, and the need to protect his identity from the person he loved most led him to make choices that ultimately destroyed the life he had built. But it also raises important questions about honesty in relationships. How much do we owe each other when it comes to our pasts? And can love survive the weight of hidden truths? The consequences of keeping secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, can be devastating. In this case, John's fear of being judged for his past and Sarah's inability to process the shock of the truth led to a breakdown that neither could have foreseen. What began as a passionate love story turned into a tragedy that left two lives broken, a family devastated, and an entire community grappling with the aftermath. As much as this story is about betrayal, it is also about the dangers of unspoken truths, the complexities of identity, and the importance of trust in relationships. The road to understanding, acceptance, and healing is long, and in some cases, it may be too late to undo the damage done. This story is heart-wrenching, and it leaves us with so many questions. What do you think about this tragedy? Could it have been avoided? Was there any way to heal the wounds of secrecy before it reached this point? How would you have handled the situation if you were Sarah or John? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Your insights and discussions help us learn from these stories. If you found this video compelling, please hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching and for taking the time to reflect on this deeply emotional and tragic story.